My name is Stefan Thomas. I'm CTO at Ripple Labs, and I've been a Bitcoin developer for several years before that. One thing that really fascinates me about Bitcoin is that it's really a new frontier. It's something that hasn't been done before, and it's just that kind of thing that I really like and like to explore. I'd really like it that if people recognize that I try to do new things, and I try to be kind of inclusive and try to build things that will help a lot of people. And hopefully on my tombstone will say something like, builder or constructor or something like that. So Bitcoin is facing a very entrenched financial industry, and obviously there's a lot of interests both on the government side and as far as like the financial institutions are concerned. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that are unhappy with the way the financial system is working, and so Bitcoin has the challenge of like finding new ways of doing things while still addressing a lot of the needs that the financial industry is addressing. So how do you deal with fraud? How do you deal with criminals and this kind of thing? And like Bitcoin needs to find good answers to these solutions, and while at the same time increasing access and making it cheaper for people to interact. Transparency is a big issue, and the bigger Bitcoin gets, the more regulators are interested in it. And I would say the number one thing that they ask for is for users to be identified, because that's really the way financial regulation works. Is everyone knows who are the parties that are being transacted with, and financial institutions have the obligation to identify anyone that they deal with. And so one of the things that's happening in Bitcoin right now is that people are coming up with new solutions to these problems. For example, at Ripple Labs, we've just released a new name feature to identify people. So you basically just pick a name, and that's the starting point, right? And from there, we're going to have the ability to verify your address, verify who you are, and then hopefully build the architecture, the infrastructure that banks need in order to start adopting this space. There are some companies that are exploring the same kind of problems that we're trying to tackle. I think the approaches are slightly different, but we just got to see what works and what people accept and what the regulators like as well. So what Bitcoin provides, and that's the same for Ripple as well, is it provides a very solid foundation. It's everyone's cryptographically verified, and it's very clear to see, this address is sending money to this address, and it's all very open and very transparent. The problem is, how do you tie that back to the real world? How do you tie that back to a real identity? And that's where a lot of the innovation has to come in, and I think that's where you're going to see the most of the innovation taking place. There's a kind of a related problem, which is how do you deal with fraud? If you give a lot of people access, some of those people might not be entirely honest and might be criminals, and so how do you deal with that? And I think once you start from a basis of being able to identify people and for people to prove who they are, honest users, they are very happy to do that because it allows them to be less risky. Like for example, if I want to transact with someone, the more they can trust me, the less they have to overcharge me with some sort of risk premium, right? So, better risk management also means less fees, less cost, and so I think there's a lot of motivation for honest users to try to go and identify themselves and build a reputation. And I think Bitcoin can do a lot in terms of like providing new solutions for these kinds of issues. No, I don't think that Bitcoin and Ripple are necessarily competitors. I think Bitcoin is a novel kind of asset. It's a digital asset that you can send online, whereas Ripple is intended as a payment network that can transfer any kind of asset, usually something like fiat currencies or commodities and other kinds of value online. And so with Ripple, the problem we're trying to solve is like, how do you take something like a gold bar or $100 bill and send it over the internet? And for that to work, there has to be someone actually storing that asset, and for that we use gateways, and that's just fundamentally different than what Bitcoin's trying to do, and so I think the two are complementary. So the way that Ripple Labs finances itself is that the creators of Ripple, the founders, they issued the original Ripple built-in currency, and we use that for transaction fees and other functions. And so a good chunk of that was gifted to the company when it was founded. And so the intention there was it would give most of it away, and that would be used to build a network and incentivize people to use it, and get major partners on board and that kind of thing. And then part of it can also use in order to finance its operations. And so we are entirely reliant on people using the network and adopting this currency. And so the more valuable the network is, the more valuable our company is, and then we can sell some of these XRP in order to finance our operations. And so that's a very unique model, I think. It's exactly as valuable as useful the network is, and so the better job we do, the more reward we get, essentially. He did, everything right, pretty much, and it's actually kind of amazing how even years after he left the community, there were still things that we sort of stumbled upon and noticed that, oh wow, like he foresaw that, and he set us up in the right way, and so. Also, just the way that he was really generous with his time and with his Bitcoins early on, and to try to promote the network and try to get people interested, it's just very inspiring. So whoever he is, he's done an incredible job, like creating this completely new system that we can now build on. We know that Satoshi was interested or even involved in the cypherpunk movement, which is dealt with things like cryptography and making encryption accessible to people. And so one of the experiences of that was that very often the developers of the software that was intended to make people freer were actually harassed and had difficulties because if the government doesn't have anyone to go after, they find somebody. And so I think he was just worried that could happen to him. And so if my best guess would be he just wanted to make it not about him but about the code itself and let the code speak for itself. So that's, I think, why he chose to stay anonymous. I really believe that people are individuals, and I believe that it is the job of society to make sure that people can pursue the things that they are interested in, can live their life the way that they believe is best, and there is a lot that has to go right in order for a society to enable that. And I think that if you look across history, we're very fortunate in that today we are much freer than most people have been for most of history. And I think it's very important that we work to protect that and to expand on that. So I think freedom is probably the thing that I would care about the most. I think for banks to start adopting Bitcoins, there needs to be the identity layer, ways to comply with the regulation. Like, banks are quite interested in this space, and they realize that there's problems there, and there's a lot of banks that could benefit from joining something like Bitcoin or Ripple. And for them, the hurdles are usually around compliance, potentially the risk of just getting involved in any new technology. So I think it's just going to be a slow process of addressing those concerns and building the technology layers that they need to comply with the regulations. So I think we're on the right path. So I think that the first thing I would point to is when I first joined, the reason I chose to spend my time on it and I chose to join was just the people. There's some absolutely incredible people working for Ripple Labs, and just the privilege of being able to work with these people is absolutely amazing. And as far as our investors go, I think that they recognize that here you have some guys who get it. We understand what the concerns are that banks bring up. We've been, I've been working in Bitcoin for years before I joined Ripple, trying to get banks to adopt Bitcoin, and so I know exactly what they say and I know exactly what their concerns are. And I think they feel like Ripple is in a position to address some of these problems, and I think they believe in our technology. So I think that's why they would invest. In Ripple, you still have a relationship with the gateway. So there's an institution that you trust to hold your money, and they might be supported by the government through some kind of insurance like FDIC or through the European Central Bank or whatever the case may be. But we don't want to completely replace the existing system. We want to make it better. We want to make it faster and more reliable. But users don't necessarily need to directly use Ripple. They don't need to necessarily directly use Bitcoin. They can interact through these intermediaries. And I think that banks do serve a useful function. Where the current state of the industry has gone wrong is because there's not enough competition and it's too hard to get into the space. And I think if there were more competition, if there were these cryptographic networks that can enforce certain rules on banks, I think you could come up with a system that's ultimately more stable and more reliable. There's a lot of different ways that you could use Ripple, and in many ways the protocol is pretty agnostic in terms of what the use case is. The closest analog that we found is what we're essentially trying to do is what the web did for information. So with the web, there was suddenly a way to address information no matter where it was stored and access it no matter where it was stored. With Ripple, we're trying to do the same thing for value. So no matter where your money is, and no matter where you want to send it, we can allow you to get it from point A to point B. And I think that is the core thing. And whether that's remittance or whether that's payments doesn't really matter, right? So I think that people will build applications for all sorts of use cases. There's a network fee, which is right now on the order of a millionth of a cent or something like that. So it's very small. But it could rise depending on how scalable we can make the software and how many transactions we can process. There's also the possibility that gateways will charge fees. Right now, most gateways are free, and it's possible to imagine that gateways would finance themselves with the float, which is if you deposit money with them, they earn interest, and if they don't necessarily pass that on to you, or they only pass it on in some reduced amount, they can actually make money just by having your deposit. And other than that, it's just a market thing. Depending on how cheap gateways can make their service, that's how cheap it'll be. So in terms of the way that we're securing Ripple and Bitcoin, we use the latest in the state-of-the-art encryption and latest in security technology, but we don't rely on that. So ultimately, the Ripple network and the Bitcoin network are run by people. So whenever there are significant breaches of the software, those get fixed, and then if they are like legitimate security holes that require intervention, then we can even roll back the network and start again from an early date without the security issue. So that's happened in Bitcoin before, where there's been a breach very early on in the history of Bitcoin, where you could sum up the inputs to a transaction and get an overflow, and then suddenly get a much larger output than what was actually intended to come out. And the way that the Bitcoin community addressed that is it was detected very quickly, it was fixed, the fix was pushed out, and then miners actually actively switched to the fixed fork, right? And so that way the issue got corrected, and the transaction that was corrupted was cleaned from the history. So these systems are often presented as being very autonomous, but at the end of the day, there's still humans watching it and still making sure that ultimately it's working and it's doing the right thing.